Welcome to the Deep Dive. We jump straight into the source material to get you fully informed fast. Today we're diving deep into King Charles III, Charles Philip Arthur George, the man who spent, well, basically his entire adult life in a very public apprenticeship.
It's really quite something when you think about it. He wasn't just the longest-serving heir apparent in British history. He also became the oldest person ever to actually take the throne.
73 years old.
73. An heir apparent basically from the moment his mother, Elizabeth II, became queen back in 1952. He was just, what,
4 years old.
Yeah. So he officially became Duke of Cornwall, Duke of Rothesay, all those titles instantly. He passed Edward VII's record for longest wait way back in 2011.
And that's really the core of what we want to unpack today, isn't it? 70 years in the public eye. 70 years forming views, building things, weathering, frankly, huge personal crises. So our mission in this deep dive is to explore that preparation. How does a man known for being, let's say, passionate, interventionist even, and someone who went through so much private turmoil, how does he prepare for and then step into the role of a strictly neutral monarch?
Yeah.
We'll be looking at his pretty unique education, those very public, very polarizing marriages, and his surprisingly deep activism on everything from, well, buildings to environmentalism.
It's a fascinating journey.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Born 1948, Buckingham Palace, cesarean section, which was noted at the time. But his path afterwards, educationally, was really quite new for an heir, wasn't it?
Completely new. I mean, the big thing is he was the first heir apparent to actually go to school. No more just private tutors hidden away.
Right.
That was a very deliberate break. Started at Hill House School in '56, then Cheam School. But the place that really looms large in his story, and maybe not always positively, is Gordonstoun.
Gordonstoun. The famously tough boarding school in Scotland. His father, Prince Philip, went there too.
He did. And this is where, as you said, the narrative gets complicated. Charles, in that authorized biography, called it Colditz in Kilts.
Wow.
Yeah. He blamed his father, suggesting Philip ignored his more sensitive nature and just forced him into this really rough environment. Sounds like he felt quite isolated. Reports of bullying, too.
That image of him being miserable there definitely stuck for years.
It dominated the press, yeah. And the sources back up that emotional difficulty. But, and this is important, his views seem to, let's say, evolve over time. Later on, Charles actually praised Gordonstoun.
Really? After Colditz and Kilts?
Well, he said it taught him a great deal about myself and my own abilities and disabilities. He even followed his father in becoming head boy, and more recently became its patron in 2024. So it's complex, a lifelong kind of negotiation with those expectations, maybe.
Maybe that time away helped. He had a break in '66, didn't he? Spent some time in Australia.
Yes, absolutely crucial. 2 terms at Timbertop, the Geelong Grammar School campus in Victoria. He described that as the most enjoyable part of his entire education. Much freer, less stifling than Gordonstoun, it seems.
And after leaving school in '67, he kept breaking the mold. Straight to university, not the military first.
Exactly. Another huge departure from royal norms. He hired Trinity College, Cambridge, started with archaeology and anthropology, interestingly, then switched to history.
And he made that effort to learn Welsh, too, didn't he? Preparing for the Prince of Wales role.
He did. Spent a term at the University College of Wales in Aberystwyth, specifically studying Welsh history and language that was, directly relevant to his future investiture.
Which all led to another first for the monarchy.
Yes. Charles graduated in 1970, becoming the first British heir apparent ever to earn a university degree. Now, people often point to the grade.
The 2.2, lower second-class honors. For our audience who followed this closely, that detail often comes up. Was it seen as a bit disappointing or just amazing he did it at all?
Overwhelmingly, it was seen as a massive achievement. You have to remember the context. Before him, it was tutors, maybe some military college. The media focus wasn't really on the 2.2, which is a perfectly respectable pass. By the way, it was the fact he was there, sitting exams alongside everyone else.
Right.
It instantly modernized the perception of royal education. He later got his Master of Arts in '75, too, just following the standard Cambridge practice at the time.
So, degree in hand, he then did fulfill that more traditional expectation, military service, but it sounds like it was pretty hands-on.
Oh, absolutely. Not just ceremonial.
Yeah.
His service ran from 1971 to 1976. He actually started his RAF training while still at Cambridge, got his wings in '71. Then was off to the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, served on proper warships, HMS Norfolk, Minerva, Jupiter. He didn't just get handed things.
He qualified as a helicopter pilot too, right? And commando training.
Yes, qualified helicopter pilot at RNAS Yeovilton and did the demanding commando course at Limestone. You don't just breeze through those.
Yeah.
His final stint, the last 10 months, was actually commanding a ship.
Commanding. A real
Uh,
command.
a real command. The coastal mine hunter, HMS Bronington. So he held a proper command rank before retiring as a commander in 1976.
But his flying days ended quite suddenly later on. There was an incident.
There was a serious one in 1994.
Mm.
He was actually a passenger on a BA-146 aircraft of the Queen's flight, invited onto the flight deck. It crash-landed on Aisley. The inquiry found the crew negligent. After that, Charles decided to stop flying Royal aircraft himself entirely, put a firm stop to that part of his life. So once he left active service, Charles really stepped into the role he'd been preparing for his whole life, Prince of Wales. And that meant stepping into, well, an incredibly intense public spotlight for the next, 5 decades?
50 years. He'd technically held the title since 1958 when he was a boy. But the big moment was that investiture ceremony in 1969. Carnarvon Castle, televised. That really put him on the political map, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It was this huge, grand affair, but it was also really tense. There was a lot of Welsh nationalist feeling at the time. Protests, even bomb threats.
Right.
So that effort he'd made earlier, learning Welsh at Aberystwyth, that was a direct attempt to kind of, smooth things over, show respect. It showed early on he understood the political tightrope he was walking.
And he didn't shy away from the political sphere back home either. The sources mention his maiden speech in the House of Lords in 1974. Why was that significant?
It was huge because it broke such a long precedent. No royal had spoken from the floor, as it were, in the Lords since the future Edward the XI, way back in 1884. Nearly 90 years.
Wow.
So him doing that immediately signaled, I'm going to engage. I'm interested in policy. This was long before the whole Black Spider Memos thing blew up. It set a pattern. He wasn't going to be just a ribbon cutter.
And on the world stage, he was essentially the Queen's main representative during some really pivotal, sometimes tricky moments for the Commonwealth.
Exactly. He was there for Fiji's independence celebrations in 1970, Zimbabwe's in 1980. And crucially, perhaps most symbolically, he represented the Queen at the Hong Kong handover ceremony in 1997.
So he was right there navigating those complex transitions?
Right in the middle of it. His presence meant he was part of managing the UK's relationship with its former empire as it evolved.
These international duties also put him in real danger sometimes. The sources highlight a couple of quite scary security incidents.
Yeah, you can't forget the risks. There was that assassination attempt plot in New Zealand in 1983. An individual who'd already targeted the Queen tried to get Charles during his tour with Diana and baby William. Chilling.
And then Australia.
Australia, 1994. A young man named David Kang fired 2 blank shots right at Charles during an Australia Day event in Sydney.
Blanks, thankfully, but still terrifying. Was it political?
Yes, very much so. Kang was protesting the Australian government's treatment of Cambodian asylum seekers. Charles was the target simply because he was the symbol, the representative figure. It highlights the vulnerability that comes with the role.
Okay, let's move into the area that really defines so much of his public image in the 80s and 90s, his personal life, the marriages, the scandals. It seems his great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, played quite a role early on.
Mountbatten's advice has become infamous, hasn't it? Basically, he told Charles to sow his wild oats, have his fun as a bachelor. But when it came to marriage, the bride had to be suitable, attractive, and sweet-charactered. And crucially,
With minimal romantic history.
exactly, minimal experience. That criteria really narrowed the field and pointed directly towards the very young Diana Spencer.
They married in that huge fairy tale wedding in 1981, but the age gap, 13 years, and just basic incompatibility meant it soured incredibly quickly. The press dubbed them the Glums.
It really didn't take long. Within about 5 years, the marriage was visibly struggling. And that set the stage for, well, arguably the biggest royal crisis of the modern era.
The timeline is important here, isn't it, about the affairs?
It is. Charles himself confirmed in that big TV interview in 1994 that he had started his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles again in 1986. But, and this was his key point, he insisted it was only after his marriage to Diana had, in his words, irretrievably broken down.
Right. And then came Diana's own bombshell interview in 1995, the Panorama one.
The Panorama interview, where she delivered that line that just absolutely stunned everyone. Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Devastatingly effective. But even before those admissions, the public had already been exposed to something incredibly private and, frankly, humiliating.
You mean Tampon Gate? or Camillagate, as it was also known.
Yes, that bugged phone call from 1989.
Yeah. The tabloids got hold of and published transcripts of this incredibly intimate, frankly bizarre and embarrassing phone conversation between Charles and Camilla. The content itself was shocking enough.
The tampon reference became notorious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But beyond the sheer cringe factor, why was that particular leak so damaging constitutionally?
Good question. It wasn't just personal embarrassment. It fundamentally undermined the perceived moral authority of the future king. The monarchy runs on a degree of, mystique, tradition, projecting a certain standard. This revealed the heir actively involved in adultery, showing incredibly poor judgment about security and privacy, and frankly made him look ridiculous to many. It colored public perception of both him and Camilla for literally decades.
Decades. And even after the divorce in 1996 and Diana's tragic death a year later, the shadow of that period continued, including those very serious claims made by Diana's butler, Paul Burrell.
The note, claiming Diana feared Charles was planning an accident.
Yes. Burrell published a note he said Diana wrote in 1995, alleging Charles was plotting some kind of car incident so he could remarry. Now, it was never proven, became huge tabloid fodder, but it led to something extraordinary.
Charles being questioned by the police.
Exactly. The Metropolitan Police, during Operation Paget, their investigation into Diana's death, actually interviewed Charles. He stated he knew nothing about the note, couldn't understand why she might feel that way. The police eventually concluded their investigation in 2023, taking no action. But it's still part of that whole grim aftermath.
Yet, despite all that history, all the public negativity towards Camilla, Charles eventually made it clear. Their relationship was non-negotiable, which led to their wedding in 2005.
And getting to that wedding involved navigating some very specific royal and legal hurdles. They opted for a civil ceremony, a first for a senior royal in England. But they couldn't just have it at Windsor Castle, could they?
No, that's a fascinating bit of legal trivia. Why Windsor Guildhall instead?
Because English law states that if you get a license for civil marriages at a specific venue, like Windsor Castle, then that venue has to be available for any member of the public who wants to get married there.
Right. They'd have had weddings booked at the castle every weekend.
Pretty much. So to avoid that, they had to use an already licensed public venue, the Guildhall nearby. It just shows the weird technical hoops the royals sometimes have to jump through.
And the Queen's role at the wedding.
Also significant. As Supreme Governor of the Church of England, she didn't attend the civil ceremony itself. That might have been seen as endorsing something the church at the time still had issues with, but she did attend the religious blessing service afterwards and hosted the reception at the castle. That was the crucial public signal of acceptance, really.
Okay, so beyond the personal dramas, what really marks Charles out, what filled those decades as Prince of Wales, was this deep, almost restless activism on social and environmental issues. He wasn't just turning up, he was driving agendas. Highly unusual for a future king.
That's absolutely the defining characteristic of his time as heir. He wasn't passive. He poured his energy into creating things, huge charitable ventures. It started with the Prince's Trust back in 1976.
Found it with his own money.
Yeah, his Royal Navy severance pay, just £7,400. From that small start, it grew into something enormous.
The King's Trust, as it is now, is huge, isn't it?
Massive. It became the UK's largest multi-cause charity setup, raising over $100 million a year, helping young people, environment, arts, architecture, you name it. The stats are pretty staggering by 2020. Supported over 1 million young people, helped start 125,000 businesses. That's a very real, tangible legacy.
But, and it's a big but, this charitable empire wasn't without serious controversy, particularly around where some of the money came from. We need to tread carefully here, but it's important for understanding the scrutiny he faced.
Absolutely. This is where you see that constant tension. Needing big money for big projects versus the absolute need for a squeaky clean ethics when you're the heir to the throne. This high-profile case involved cash donations from Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jabbar Al Thani, the former Prime Minister of Qatar.
And we're talking significant cash, 3 million euros between 2011 and 2015.
Yes. And the detail that really caught the public eye, as the sources reported, was how it was delivered. Sometimes allegedly in Fortnum & Mason carrier bags, sometimes even a suitcase or a hold-all full of banknotes.
I mean, the optics of that are just terrible, regardless of legality.
Precisely. It looks awful. Now, the Charity Commission looked into it. They reviewed the information and closed the case in July 2022. No further action. They said there was no evidence the payments were illegal or that they weren't intended for the charity.
But the way it was done, accepting huge bundles of cash, That raises questions about judgment, doesn't it? About due diligence within his team?
It absolutely does. The failure to see the massive reputational risk was really the core issue there. And it wasn't the only funding controversy. There was also the £1 million donation accepted in 2013 from Bakr and Shafiq bin Laden.
Osama bin Laden's half-brothers, that sounds incredibly problematic. How is that justified?
Well, the Prince of Wales' charitable fund trustees argued they'd done due diligence, consulted widely. They stressed the money came from the half-brothers who had no known links to terrorism themselves. But again, the public perception. It's difficult. The Charity Commission looked at this too and basically said it was a decision for the trustees, no formal investigation needed.
It paints a picture of constant tightrope walking, doesn't it? Balancing fundraising needs with the impeccable image required by the crown.
Exactly. And there was a third major issue. The Metropolitan Police investigation into cash for honors claims linked to the Separate Princes Foundation.
Allegations that big donations might lead to gongs or citizenship?
That was the allegation. Foreign donors giving large sums and potentially getting honors in return. Again, the police investigated and announced in 2023 that no further action would be taken. But taken together, these three situations meant his charities, despite all the good work, were operating under this cloud of financial scrutiny right up until he became king.
Let's shift focus to another of his great passions, architecture. He wasn't just interested, he was a fierce advocate for a particular style, new classical, and a very vocal critic of modernism.
Fierce is the word. His whole philosophy was about traditional urbanism, keeping things on a human scale, conservation. And he wasn't afraid to voice his opinions, often quite bluntly. The most famous example, the one everyone remembers, was in 1984, talking about a proposed extension to the National Gallery in London.
The monstrous carbuncle.
A monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved friend. That phrase became legendary.
But was it just talk? Did his criticism actually change things?
Oh, absolutely. That's the crucial point. His intervention had real power. Because he said that, the proposed design was completely scrapped. It showed he could and would use his platform to basically impose his aesthetic views. It wasn't just an opinion, it had consequences.
And he didn't just criticize, he started building his own vision, didn't he? Poundbury.
Exactly. Poundbury in Dorset is the ultimate real-world test case. An entire town built on Duchy of Cornwall land, designed according to his traditional principles. He tried something similar in Scotland, too. With the Knockroon development people called it the Scottish Poundbury.
He even intervened in private projects, like Chelsea Barracks.
He did. He famously wrote to the Qatari royal family, who owned the Chelsea Barracks site back in 2009. He told them Lord Rogers's modern design was unsuitable and urged them to reconsider. And they did. It showed the reach of his influence.
That same level of deep, long-term commitment is obvious in his environmentalism, too. He was talking about this stuff way before it became mainstream.
Decades before. His first major speech on pollution and plastics was in 1970. He was 21 years old. Think about that.
Remarkable foresight.
Truly. And he put his money where his mouth was, became a huge advocate for organic farming, launched his own organic food brand, Duchy Originals, in 1990.
And that was successful. Did it make money?
Very successful. And significantly, all the profits, millions of pounds, over £6 million by 2010 alone, went straight to his charities. It wasn't a vanity project. It was integrated into his philanthropic work.
He also waded into the political side of food science, didn't he? GM foods.
He did. He was a very outspoken critic of genetically modified crops. He even wrote privately to Prime Minister Tony Blair about it in 1998, laying out his concerns. So again, you see that pattern of private intervention on policy.
And as the climate crisis became more urgent, his rhetoric became stronger. COP26, COP28.
Very strong. At COP26 in Glasgow, he warned world leaders it was the last chance saloon. And he called for a vast military-style campaign to get the private sector mobilized on climate action, a phrase he repeated at COP28 in Dubai. Really forceful language.
It seems his personal habits reflect these beliefs too, some quite specific dietary things.
They do. We know he famously skips lunch, apparently to fit more into the day. But more pointedly, in 2021, he revealed he cuts out meat and fish entirely 2 days a week and dairy 1 day a week, specifically for environmental reasons.
And foie gras.
And from all royal residences now. He'd actually banned it from his own homes years before becoming king. It shows these aren't just public positions. They're deeply held personal convictions.
And it's exactly this passionate interventionist approach that caused so much constitutional friction when he was Prince of Wales, especially with the government. Which brings us to The Black Spider memos.
Ah, yes, the famous memos. Called that because of his handwriting apparently quite sprawling and, well, spidery. These were letters he regularly sent to government ministers on all sorts of topics.
What kind of things?
Oh, everything. Farming subsidies, helicopter specifications for the military, architectural conservation, alternative medicine, a really wide range. Critics immediately jumped on this as political meddling, arguing it breached that core rule of royal neutrality.
There was a long legal battle to get them published, wasn't there? The Supreme Court ruled on it.
Yes, after years of the government trying to block their release, the Supreme Court cleared the way in 2015. But when they finally came out, the reaction was a bit of an anticlimax, wasn't it?
Yeah, the general consensus seemed to be they were mostly underwhelming, maybe even harmless. Some said the whole thing backfired on his critics.
That was the dominant take. But your earlier point is critical here.
Yeah.
Even if the content wasn't earth-shattering, wasn't the real constitutional issue. In fact, he was lobbying ministers privately at all, whatever the subject.
Exactly. It's the principle. The heir to the throne trying to influence policy behind the scenes consistently over years. That's the potential problem.
And the concern was real enough that senior cabinet ministers reportedly warned him about needing to change his approach once he became king, which led to him making a very public promise in 2018.
He addressed it directly in an interview, didn't he?
He did. He was asked if his meddling would continue as king. His answer was blunt. No, it won't. I'm not that stupid. I do realize that it is a separate exercise being sovereign. So, of course, I understand entirely how that should operate.
A clear statement. Yet, we have to connect this history of interventionism to his role in things like the World Economic Forum's Great Reset project. That feels important for understanding his global influence.
It's absolutely crucial. The Great Reset Initiative, which he co-launched with the WEF in 2020, aiming to reshape economies sustainably after COVID. That's perhaps the ultimate example of his using his platform for massive systemic change proposals. Officially non-political, maybe, but hugely influential on global policy discourse.
And even very late in his time as prince, his private opinions on government policy were still making headlines. The Rwanda Asylum Plan.
Yes. Sources reported in 2022 that he had privately described the UK government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda as appalling. Whether it was meant to leak or not, it showed those strong personal views on policy hadn't just vanished.
So after that record-breaking, September 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II passes away and Charles becomes king. There had been so much speculation beforehand about his regnal name. Would he avoid Charles's?
Yeah, because of the historical baggage. Yeah. Charles III, beheaded. Charles II, the Merry Monarch, known for his affairs. There was talk he might choose George VII after his grandfather.
But he didn't. He stuck with Charles III.
He did. And right from the start, there was a signal of wanting to do things a bit differently, perhaps more openly. His accession council ceremony, that ancient ritual formally proclaiming him king.
It was televised for the first time ever.
Exactly. Letting cameras in on that moment felt like a statement. A nod towards transparency, maybe modernizing the monarchy's image from day one.
And that modernizing theme carried right through to the coronation, Operation Golden Orb, on May 6th, 2023.
It was very carefully designed. The key themes were shorter, smaller, less expensive than his mother's coronation in '53. And crucially, more representative of different faiths and communities across the UK, trying to reflect the country as it is now.
There was a lovely detail that connected back to his environmentalism too, wasn't there? The anointing oil.
Yes. The holy chrism oil. Traditionally, it contained animal products like civet oil and ambergris. But Charles's coronation oil was specifically made to be vegan, based on olive oil from the Mount of Olives, where his grandmother is buried, scented with sesame, rose, jasmine, cinnamon. A really personal, symbolic touch, reflecting his own values right at the heart of that sacred ceremony.
Since becoming king, he seems to have focused quite heavily on diplomacy, especially in Europe. Historic speeches.
He really hit the ground running there, especially focusing on rebuilding ties post-Brexit. March 2023, he became the first British monarch ever to address the German Bundestag, Germany's parliament.
In German, partly.
Yes, switching between fluent German and English. Then later that year, September, another first, addressing the French Senate. These weren't just state visits. They were deliberate acts of political symbolism, using the monarchy's soft power to smooth relations.
He also faced that very difficult issue of colonial history head-on during his state visit to Kenya in 2023, calls for an apology. That must have been incredibly tricky to navigate.
Extremely delicate. Kenya was the site of the brutal Mau uprising suppression in the 1950s. Charles directly addressed it. He acknowledged the abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed during that colonial period. Strong words.
But not quite an apology.
No, he stopped short of a formal apology. That would have huge constitutional and potential legal implications, opening up debates about reparations. So it was a carefully calibrated statement, expressing deep regret and acknowledging wrongdoing, but staying within the constitutional bounds. That balancing act is key to modern royal diplomacy.
And his commitment to reconciliation in Ireland was already well established, wasn't it? That handshake with Gerry Adams.
That was a landmark moment back in 2015, years before he became king, shaking hands with the leader of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams, in Galway. Especially poignant given that the IRA had murdered his beloved great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten. It showed a real personal willingness to move beyond historical enmity for the sake of peace.
He also seemed to handle the Commonwealth's evolution pragmatically, attending Barbados becoming a republic.
Yes, in 2021, he was there representing the Queen, but also as the acknowledged future head of the Commonwealth, a role that isn't hereditary, remember. His presence signaled acceptance of Barbados's decision, supporting the Commonwealth framework even as its structure changes.
Domestically, he's made some quite significant moves on the financial side, pushing for modernization and, it seems, fiscal discipline.
This has been one of the most striking aspects of his early reign, I think. In 2023, he agreed to maintain the sovereign grant, the public funding for the monarchy, at 12% of the Crown Estate's profits. But the really big move concerned the huge boom in profits from offshore wind farms on Crown Estate land.
Right, those profits surged massively. What did he do?
Instead of letting that windfall automatically inflate the sovereign grant, which historically would have happened, Charles requested that the extra billions be used for the wider public good. Essentially, he put a cap on his own funding increase out of principle. It was a powerful statement about financial responsibility.
And he got rid of the royal train.
He did. Approved its decommissioning in June 2025 after 180 years of service. Again, the reasoning given was fiscal discipline, cutting costs, even symbolic ones. It sends a message that traditions aren't untouchable if they don't make financial sense anymore.
He also maintained that direct engagement with Commonwealth realms, like visiting Canada in 2025.
Yes, making his first visit there as king. And notably, he opened the 45th Canadian Parliament in person and delivered the speech from the throne, the first time a Canadian monarch had done that since his mother back in 1977, reasserting that direct constitutional link.
Of course, early 2024 brought those very public health concerns, the cancer diagnosis.
Yes, that was a shock. First, the announcement about treatment for a benign enlarged prostate in January 2024. Then the news that during that procedure, a separate issue cancer, though not prostate cancer, had been discovered.
Which immediately raised questions about continuity, workload.
Absolutely. The palace was clear he would continue his constitutional duties, the paperwork, state boxes, audiences, while undergoing outpatient treatment. But his public-facing engagements were postponed for a period.
Which meant Queen Camilla had to step up quite significantly.
She did. She represented him at several events, including the traditional Royal Maundy service. It showed the firm has mechanisms to cope, but it certainly put the focus on the king's health and the line of succession.
He made a public return later in the spring.
Yes, a very visible and I think well-received return to public duties in April 2024. There was another brief hospitalization reported in March 2025 due to side effects, but generally the narrative has been one of carrying on. And interestingly, his public approval ratings have actually climbed quite sharply since he became king, up to 59% by August 2025. Quite a turnaround from the difficult years.
And he's even getting recognition for his style.
Believe it or not, yes. British GQ called him a true guardian of traditional British menswear, and Time magazine included him in their 100 most influential people list in 2023. So his image seems to be consolidating in a fairly positive way.
Let's touch on some of the more personal aspects, his beliefs, his interests. He seems quite a philosophical, spiritual person.
Yeah.
How has that translated into his role as king, especially regarding religion?
It's been quite deliberate. He is, of course, a confirmed member of the Church of England, and as king, he's the supreme governor. But he made a point, even before accession, of saying he wanted to be seen not just as defender of the faith singular, meaning Anglicanism, but as a defender of faith, plural.
So protecting religious diversity.
Exactly. Committed to creating space for all faiths to flourish in the UK. He's also, remember, a member of the Church of Scotland when he's north of the border. This multi-faith commitment wasn't just talk, it was actually woven into the coronation ceremony itself.
How so? Wasn't it still a very Anglican service?
The core oath and anointing were, yes, but they added a special preamble, spoken by the Archbishop of Canterbury right near the start, explicitly acknowledging the king's duty to Foster an environment in which people of all faiths and beliefs may live freely. That was new, and a direct reflection of Charles's stated aim, making the ancient ceremony feel relevant to modern, diverse Britain.
Beyond religion, he's always been deeply involved in the arts, hasn't he? Especially painting.
Very much so. He's a keen watercolorist himself. Quite accomplished, actually. He exhibits his work, sells lithographs, apparently raised over £2 million just from sales at Highgrove over the years, all for his charities.
He founded a drawing school, too.
Yes, the Royal Drawing School in 2000. He's passionate about promoting traditional skills, and he's patron of loads of performing arts organizations, Royal Opera, Royal Shakespeare Company, the list goes on, over 20 of them.
And he was quite the sportsman in his day. Polo was a big part of his life.
A huge part. He played competitive polo quite seriously for decades, only really stopping around 2005. He was also keen on fox hunting, until the ban came in that same year. He wasn't afraid of the physical side of things.
Picked up a few injuries along the way.
Definitely. Broke his arm playing polo in 1990, fractured his shoulder in 2001, several other knocks. He certainly didn't wrap himself in cotton wool.
Okay, finally, we have to talk about the money. Royal finances are always complex and often controversial. What's the picture regarding Charles's personal wealth?
It's substantial. Estimates in 2023 put his personal fortune around $1.8 billion. A significant chunk of that was inherited, tax-exempt, from his mother, the Queen. But his main income stream for all those decades as Prince of Wales was unique.
The Duchy of Cornwall.
Exactly. This vast private estate land, property, investments, covering about 133,000 acres. It generated millions in income for him every year.
And the duchy itself hasn't been immune from financial scrutiny over the years.
No, it hasn't. Because it's a private estate, it's exempt from corporation tax, which has always raised eyebrows. It also got caught up in the Paradise Papers leak, which shone a light on some of its offshore investments. There were earlier allegations about tax avoidance, too. It highlights the very unusual, privileged financial status the heir enjoys through the duchy.
So now he's king, his income source changes to the sovereign grant. And William gets the duchy.
That's right. William is now the Duke of Cornwall and receives the duchy's income. Charles's funding comes from the public sovereign grant, linked to Crown estate profits, which he himself has now helped regulate regarding those wind farm profits.
Which leads to that slightly strange situation with Highgrove House, his longtime family home.
It's a very odd reversal. Highgrove is owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. So Charles, who lived there and developed the gardens for decades, now has to essentially pay rent to the duchy, controlled by his son William.
How much rent?
The figure reported is around £700,000 a year. It's a constitutionally necessary arrangement, but yes, a bit strange on a personal level, paying rent to your son for your own home.
So looking back over this deep dive, what we've seen is this incredible arc. From that sensitive boy sent off to Gordonstown, through the intense scrutiny and scandal of his middle years, to becoming this deeply driven Prince of Wales, a man who really defined his half-century as heir by launching ambitious projects, often ahead of their time, on the environment, architecture, youth opportunity.
And often wading into controversy while doing it.
Absolutely. And he finally inherits the throne as arguably the best prepared, most experienced, yet also one of the most publicly known and analyzed monarchs in history.
And that transition from Charles the lifelong activist prince to Charles the neutral king is where the real tension lies, isn't it? Our sources, the record, it's crystal clear. He spent decades using every tool available to him, those black spider memos, his public speeches, his charitable foundations, his architectural interventions, his global platform with things like the Great Reset to push his deeply held, sometimes very contentious views.
That vast military-style campaign for sustainability he called for, not exactly neutral language.
Not at all. His life as prince was defined by interventionist advocacy. He clearly believes passionately in these causes.
Yet he gave that very clear promise. I'm not that stupid. He said he understood he had to operate differently as sovereign, that the meddling would stop.
Exactly. And that fundamental conflict is where we want to leave you, our listeners, today. We know he promised neutrality, but we also know his entire life has been about passionate, hands-on advocacy for causes he demonstrably still believes in. We see hints in the vegan anointing oil, the fiscal discipline on the sovereign grant. So the provocative question we're left with is this. In a modern monarchy where neutrality is constitutional law, how will King Charles III channel a lifetime of passionate interventionist advocacy without speaking a single political word? And how will his established global influence, such as his leadership in the Great Reset, continue to shape global policy from a position of silence?